Well, hello and welcome everyone to the Pacifists Canada Building Conversations. Again, a session over our Zoom platform. As people are just logging on and signing in here, we'll get everybody get settled and connect in. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm now going to pass this over to our CEO, Chris Ballard. Chris. Oh, you're on mute, Chris.
Welcome, everyone. Chris Ballard, CEO of Passive House Canada. So delighted that you found some time to join us. We've got I think, a really interesting show today. So let me get going with some introductions. Deb, if you want to throw the slides up, or Sarah, again, welcome. Question we're asked, who is Passive House Canada? Well, Passive House Canada is a membership-based social enterprise. We do a lot of advocacy work with all levels of government. We do education and professional development. We provide technical services, and we have members and staff and instructors all across Canada. And we're really growing specifically in the Ontario market. So Passive House Canada, one of the things I find I really enjoy about folks at Passive House is how they share information and how we learn from one another. I find that during the day we are fierce competitors fighting for contracts, for business. But after hours, we will be raising a glass of coffee or something a little stronger and working together to solve technical issues. So I would encourage you, if you're not already, to become a member of Passive House Canada and share in that knowledge sharing and camaraderie. It really is quite something. So our mission here at Passive House Canada is to make zero emission buildings known and adopted by government, industry, and the public. We support government and industry in this transition to high performance buildings through education, through certification, and through policy development. And we promote the Passive House Institute Building Standard because it's globally recognized as the best standard for high performance buildings. So that's why that's who we are. That's what we do. Today's guest is Jeremiah Point of Point Engineering. Jeremiah hails from the Indigenous community of Akwesasne, which is a Mohawk community near Cornwall, Ontario. That is in the eastern area of Ontario. Jeremiah is the owner of Point Engineering, and as a proud resident member of Akwesasne, he takes real pride in incorporating new technologies with traditional values. And Jeremiah is also a board member of Passive House Canada, and he is committed to promoting the Passive House standard to all of his clients. And lots of exciting things happening. And we'll get into conversation with Jeremiah, not only in the Akwesasne traditional lands, but in nearby communities as well. Jeremiah is a certified Passive House designer consultant and a LEED accredited and a licensed professional engineer. So welcome, Jeremiah. I'll get you to turn your video on in a second. We'll get you on the screen in a second. Moving along, some of the issues we've come across, and we as Passive House Canada is talking with First Nation communities, and we'll explore this a little bit more with Jeremiah. That communities really are, First Nation communities really want families to be housed in homes of their own. It really makes good policy. But all too often there are homes that are not built well, and this leads to exceptionally high maintenance costs, which is a real drain on First Nation budgets. Too often families, if the house isn't built well, families are not able to maintain them and end up living in very unhealthy living conditions. And there is that, as I said, that additional expense for local government. There is the issue of energy poverty because poorly designed homes don't perform well, they're not energy efficient, and families pay an inordinate amount of money to keep their homes heated. And they're not comfortable, healthy places to live in. And they are not ready for the climate crisis. So climate adaptation is not what they're built for. So we know that both Passive House and First Nations believe in taking care of families and elders in good housing. And we all believe in caring for Mother Earth by making houses that create little pollution as possible. So with that, let's move the slide ahead, and I will invite Jeremiah to come on board. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And Jeremiah, you're there? Good to see you.
Yes, I'm here. Good to see you.
Good.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, very good. Glad to have you on board. First of all, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and how you became interested in the concept of Passive House? What attracted you to the Passive House building principle?
I think early on in my career as an engineer, I had to do a lot of heat loss calculations to size the HVAC systems. And back then, would have been around 2006, I kind of made a couple errors in my heat loss program and discovered that the size of the heating and cooling system could be dramatically reduced just by increasing R values. Back then, I didn't know what Passive House was, and it wasn't until 2019, maybe 2017, where I discovered it at a couple of expos and immediately kind of latched onto that. To me, it's quite interesting to find that correlation between how my ancestors lived in North America, which every Indigenous culture around the world, they've all had passive houses for tens of thousands of years. And today's passive house, the modern passive house, is basically the modern representation of that, and returning to that idea where you don't have an abundance of energy to sustain yourself, so you had to figure out a way.
Mm-hmm. So maybe that's really an interesting point you raise. Can you tell me a little bit about those houses of your ancestors, and what would they have looked like in your community, your area, for example?
So for my immediate area, which would be the Northeast United States and Southern Ontario, Eastern Ontario area, we had longhouses. So we would have our the eldest mother of the family would be the head of the household, and all of her descendants and anybody who married into the family would live in that same structure. Mm-hmm. And that whole family lineage would be the clan mother would lead that household, and there would be 200-300 bodies in one structure. So the houses were quite large. It was just covered in bark, but we see the same concept being proven today with the dairy farms, the local dairy farms. It's an uninsulated shell, and you put cattle in there, and the body heat keeps it warm throughout the winter. And that's basically how we figured out to live in long time ago.
Yeah, through shared living space and communal heating. I know the joke of the single family residence passive house is that 2 adults and a large dog will keep you toasty warm through the coldest of winter. So it sounds to me as if that concept, as you said, was proven long before the passive house came along. So before we get along too far, so we were talking about territory, and what I want to do is, if I can share again the map, I will, just want to share the screen again, because we have a really interesting map of where you're located. So bear with me while I bring back the technology. So this is the Akwesasne area. So tell me a bit about your home turf.
So our traditional lands extended from, say, just south of Ottawa to the Hudson River and to the Great Lakes. And that was our traditional territory. What we have left is this reserve that was created by Canada and the United States, which basically identifies where our land base is now. I live on Cornwall Island, the yellow island to the upper left. I was born and raised and lived here my entire life. The pink, the top, I guess magenta and the pink islands, that's actually in Quebec or under Quebec border, where the island is in Ontario. And then the orange at the bottom is basically in New York State. So we're quite, we don't, particularly our families and our friends and our way of life here, we don't typically let that border divide us, but it is there, and logistically it's a nightmare. So
I can imagine. So really, you're dealing with four governments. You'd be dealing with the Ontario government, the Quebec government, the New York government, and the government of five governments: government of Canada and the United States government.
That's right.
So really, two borders but five governments.
That's right. And then within our own community, we have two of our own governments, which is the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne on the north side, where Canada is, and then the St. Regis tribe, which is recognized by the United States on the southern side. So even internally, we still have two governments, and those are elected governments imposed by both Canada and US, where we also have our traditional government, Council of Chiefs, that have been in existence for over 10,000 years. And that is still in place today. So it's not quite as prevalent as or has the means, but we still have that traditional government.
Yeah. Good. It's so lots of governments you have to deal with, which speaks to, we'll get into it in a bit, speaks to, I guess, speaks to building codes, etc. So why don't you tell us a little bit about housing and living conditions in your community? Why don't we start there?
We technically we're supposed to follow the Canadian Federal Building Code, which, as everybody knows, is quite poor, especially for energy standard. Our local government has chosen to try and follow Ontario for the energy efficiency, and because it's basically the best one we have that we can adopt locally, as apart from Quebec and New York State's even worse. But what I've been pushing for the last few years has been to just create our own, and we have the ability to do that. We wouldn't have to revise any codes or change any codes. We would just start our own from scratch. And my push is to have us write our own codes and be at the passive house level of efficiency right from the start. Because so far our current housing standard is basically about 20 to 30 years behind what Ontario or Quebec is doing. We're always playing catch up. R2000 didn't trickle in until 15, 20 years later. And we struggle to meet those codes for the lack of education and the lack of awareness and what's possible. So
yeah. So how do you bring this concept of traditional First Nation concerns together with sort of this more modern, and we talked about bridging passive house with traditional cultural housing, but how do you do it how do you bridge this in a modern era? How do you talk to your councils about passive house? How might you get them on board with this?
Well, whenever I can corner someone and talk their ear off, I tend to I demonstrate, I show them the link between what our traditional teachings is to make decisions based on how it will affect the seventh generation to come. Right. And if we're building houses that can't last 7 generations, then we're not living up to that, those traditional teachings. And having that ability, especially with passive house, to have that longevity and make that connection, then they start to see that same connection, and they start to want it. They start to listen.
Right. So the traditional teachings about 7 generations and treading softly on Mother Earth ties in nicely It sounds
That's
to
right.
me ties nicely with what Passive House is talking about. So how is progress?
It's been slow. I've been, like I said, I've been at this for probably 3 years, maybe a little longer, but been advocating and talking to anybody who will listen, and anybody who I do get a chance to sit down with and explain everything to them. Uh, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it, and that
Right,
becomes your new objective. Where up until now, it's always been trying to meet building code, and I explained to them building code is the legal minimum standard by law, and why is that the
right,
target? So we could far exceed that, and we could just leapfrog all of the growing pains that came with the R2000 era and all of the slow progress of building construction, and we can just jump right to passive house. And since our houses don't last 20 years before needing a major renovation, sometimes 15 years, uh, if we were to say that today and require passive houses today for any new construction or rebuild, major rebuild, we would have everybody in a passive house within 20 years. It's just the fact of life here. So,
hmm,
and really that's the blink of an eye. I mean, as we get older, we all realize how fast time flies, and
right.
it'd be great to see some significant change.
Yeah. So to move it all to that and have people in buildings that are better for their health and better for energy poverty. And really better for the bottom line, I guess, of the First Nation government, which is providing the major maintenance on the houses in your
Right.
community. Just explain a little bit about how home ownership works in Akwesasne, because there are parts of the country where Indigenous people can't actually have title to their house and property, but you can, I understand.
That's right. So we're one of the communities that early on we had that established, and we do own our own properties, and we did start a mortgage program for the first time ever. We had access to mortgages probably about
Right.
10 years ago now. So
Okay.
there is some restrictions associated with the mortgage as well. So it kind of it's very limited budget to try and build anything. So that's always the question when you mention passive houses: how much more is it going to cost?
Right.
And as long as we have an emergency repair fund running around repairing these poorly built houses, people aren't thinking about those long-term operation costs. They're just trying to get a roof over their head.
Right. Absolutely. But it must be a real financial burden on the government.
Well, with the mortgage program, it's quite restricted, and there are funding programs for housing. And usually it's in the form of a 0% loan. So the homeowner is actually ending up paying for their own house.
Right.
And then they have to foot the energy bills afterwards. And without a building code or enforcement or inspections, it's really difficult to get that level of efficiency or any kind of a standard being met.
Right. And so this is where the Passive House Standard could simplify things for the First Nation government. It
That's
sounds to
right.
me. Yeah, good. So, what do you see as you're out and about and meeting with members from other First Nation communities across Canada and the United States, really? What do you see as the key opportunities for policy changes respecting building standards and energy efficiencies? So, what are the opportunities in Indigenous communities across Canada and the United States for Passive House?
For us in particular, and probably a lot of other communities, is that it would address a huge concern and a huge financial burden of poorly built houses. We can then not rely on the external governments, Canadian government, US government, to come in and tell us what we need and
Hmm.
give us houses, which I've seen modular homes being shipped to Akwesasne, and they're built for Southern Ontario conditions, and they're shipping them that far up north, which is the same latitude distance as South Carolina. So it just doesn't make any sense. But this is what the government has implemented. It's got to be bottom dollar, it's got to be shipped, it's got to be fast to try and address a concern housing crisis, but it's not proper. It's just not, it's a setup for failure, and then it's the homeowners and the community that's struggling with it afterwards. So
Yeah,
given the
yeah.
tools to be able to self-determine and decide and address these concerns internally would go a long way
Mhm.
as far as helping the community, as opposed to just giving them something and then leaving them with the burden of it afterwards.
Of it afterwards, yeah. And my experience in working in with Indigenous communities in Canada's Arctic areas is you mentioned the word fast. So First Nation governments would lobby for housing funding, and it would be delayed, and then there would be the approval. But they only had months, literally, to spend the money before that money would be clawed back. There's just no way you can design and build, housing in a matter of months. So you end up buying modular homes that are trucked in by road or come in on a barge. By the time they make it to the site, first of all, they're not designed for northern climates. And second of all, the abuse these houses take as they're being trucked and barged and craned, they're pretty broken by the time they show up in the community. So you talked about a house in Akwesasne lasting 20 years. A lot of these homes that I saw brought into remote communities, if you got 10 years out of them, you were lucky. They were filled with mold. There also were homes that weren't meant for more than 4 or 5 people, but the housing shortage in so many First Nation communities mean there'd be easily double that number of people living in those homes. And so you have, with that comes humidity and vapor issues, and with that comes mold issues and then health issues, and it's just spiraling. So I think your key message here is about self-determination and not rushing, getting it right, and the self-determination is critical. That's been my experience. It sounds to me as if that plays out in Akwesasne as well.
That's right. And that's exactly, we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and all the studies and everything, and people forget that that was the first step. That is not the finish. That is not the end. That is the first step. And we need to keep moving forward. And that's inclusion, it's education. It's where education has been severely underfunded and lacking in First Nations communities, and putting that to the forefront so people actually know what they're getting, and they understand what they're getting, and they know what to ask for as well, and what's possible. Right.
And we're going to touch on education in a minute, because that's really so important. But I'm interested in your thoughts as well about what are the economic development, the job opportunities for passive house construction in Indigenous communities? What's your experience? What are your thoughts? What are your hopes and dreams?
For this area, because Eastern Ontario is just barely starting to gain traction for passive house, and with my community in particular, because we exist right on the Canada-US border, we're able to freely travel and work on both sides. So anybody who's surrounding us is also an opportunity for us to become the experts and be the leaders in this next evolution of housing, and basically deliver the end game. Like, we all know passive house, and everybody on this call, we all know passive house is the end game, and we need to stop messing around with anything less than just jump right to the finish line.
Right. Okay. And I know Akwesasne has a real proud tradition of working in buildings. Akwesasne, Gananakwe. These are the men who worked the iron buildings, the skeletons, building New York and Toronto and Montreal and those places. So there is a tradition of construction, and a proud tradition of construction for folks in the community. What I want to do is I'll just share my screen one last time here, so that how's that? Am I sharing my screen?
You are. Yeah.
Yay. So tell me about this picture, Jeremiah, and what you were trying to do here. Picture in your mind, if you will, a group of students in a classroom and they're being lectured at. And tell us where this class was taking place and what was being taught, Jeremiah.
So what you brought up was in 2019, which was when I was going through my training to be a certified passive house designer. They mentioned during the class that there was this tradesperson course that was kind of new and kind of coming out and being developed. So as soon as I heard that in one of the classes, which was through Passive House Canada, I immediately jumped on the phone, contacted the closest certified trainer, and worked directly with them, which was Peel Passive House, and worked directly with them to bring this Passive House tradesperson course to Akwesasne. In 2019, it was very unknown or it wasn't really done in Eastern Canada. So this was actually the first one done in Eastern Canada, and we held it at our adult education facility, Yohahio, down in the Quebec portion and Snai of our community. They had the perfect facility. The trainers loved it. And there was talks of trying to continue this and hopefully make this facility a permanent training facility for Passive House. We had 14 people from our community attend. We had a couple from Montreal and one from Peterborough, as well as one individual from the Ganawage Housing Department near Montreal come and attend the course for the 3 days.
Right. So it clearly speaks to the interest in construction that your community has.
Definitely, and like as you mentioned, with our iron workers working in New York City on high iron, we're quite accustomed to the labor and the construction and that kind of labor force, as well as a lot of our youth have gone through college and university. So we also have lawyers and doctors and engineers and architects, and the reality is that my generation is the very first generation to not have that those policies of Canada and US from the past trying to enfranchise us into Canada and remove our status as First Nations and Indigenous people. So as the first generation to not have to experience that directly, and then we have doctors and lawyers and engineers and architects and tons of construction workers, and the amount of growth that's ahead of us is just unbelievable. There's so much potential and opportunity, and it's just introducing that knowledge, and it'll just take off like fire from there.
Right. So we've talked about Akwesasne. We've talked about the need for a First Nations government to adopt its own building code. From your perspective, tell us what's happening in surrounding communities and why training of Akwesasne folks is so important. You talked about you're near Cornwall. There's some exciting things happening there and north of there. What's the opportunity for people from Akwesasne?
Well, it's there's such a demand for it, and I had a couple of builders in the Cornwall area approach me because when you go on the website, I'm listed as a certified designer, and I've worked with them in the past, who approached me to partner with them on a few developments in the Cornwall area that they are striving to be close to passive or actually be certified passive, and it's just to have that kind of opportunity and that traction starting to pick up. And I always say the same thing. It's the passive house community is growing exponentially, and there's room for everybody. So we need to get on board and be leaders. And that is starting to gain traction in Eastern Ontario and starting to take off. So it's quite a couple of significant projects, and people are getting pretty excited about it.
Yeah, we're talking, I guess, in the coming years, the potential of hundreds of passive homes being built. And I will remind everyone that there is more than one certification for Passive House, that if you can't, for whatever reasons, you can't make it to Passive House standard, there's Passive House Plus, there's energy, there's a number of things that you can do to build to Passive House. So it sounds to me, Jeremiah, it's about building capacity in your community that training up the folks who are in the slide. It's not just about building homes in your community. It's also the ability to export that labor to surrounding communities, whether they be in Canada or the United States. And with interest in passive house growing, it seems to me that that's really smart, and we need to partner with you and your community to make sure we've got tradespeople, certified designer consultants, all ready to go as passive house explodes literally across Ontario. So good work on that.
One of the significant projects that I'm involved in right now is our volunteer fire department, who had approached me to assist them basically as an owner's representative. They need to replace one of the stations in our community down in Sny, and when they approached me, they said they wanted passive. So it's going to be, it is not actually going to be certified, but it is going to be meeting the passive level efficiency for a fire station that's going to house the fire trucks and the fire department staff. So it's definitely gaining some traction here, and I'm quite excited about it. We're at about 90% design complete right now, and hopefully the funding comes through to actually get it built.
Excellent. And I know this may sound like a heresy to passive house folks on today's webinar, but I'm a big believer that we need as many certified buildings as we can get. That is the ultimate target, is to go for the certified buildings. But sometimes we have to crawl before we walk and walk before we run. So in your case, in Akwesasne, introducing people to this concept of high performance buildings and passive house concept. You've got the fire hall. This is a really good first step, I would imagine. What do you think?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm so excited to what's going to happen in the future, the changes that are going to take. It's like I said, it's been a few years. It's quite exhausting and a lot of effort and a lot of work, but to see something actually changing now is really motivating and quite exciting.
Great. So tell me a little bit more about the work you're doing. You mentioned that there are developers in the area who want to work with you to develop passive house. What's happening in Cornwall, which I guess is the largest city closest to you?
Yeah, I'm dealing with the city of Cornwall. I met with them a couple of times. I've had signed up a couple of their staff from their social housing department to attend the passive house trades courses, which you helped me establish that. And they are definitely looking for that level of efficiency and low operating cost, because as we all know, cost of construction is high, but let's not dish out huge dollars for the operation and maintenance afterwards. And that's where these social housing within the city is definitely, that's right up their alley to build a low maintenance building and low energy cost.
Right. And we know right across Canada, the uptake by social housing organizations has been quite significant for those very reasons, the lower operating and maintenance costs as you go along. So you may get money from government to build, but you don't necessarily get money for maintenance and for operating. Right. So you build to passive house or you renovate to passive house standards, and you drop those costs as you go along. Anything else? You're up in Ottawa working on some projects, are you?
Yeah, so most of my Ottawa work is not passive. It's mostly building commissioning of systems and commercial and industrial. So there's been several projects within the Ottawa area, and I have yet to make the connection up there and get involved with the passive house. But even on the building commissioning, where I focus a lot on mechanical, electrical, there's now being introduced for building envelope commissioning, so quality control and inspection for building envelopes, and that's where we're seeing the start of an introduction of high performance wall assemblies and that kind of reaching for that efficiency, especially with Canada's targets for 2030, and there's quite a push for that.
Yeah, good. So I know the next slide after our trades course picture here has a few points on it. and I just that you and I had developed in talking about Akwesasne. Let's run through them and see if there's anything else that we can add, Jeremiah.
Sure.
We talked about passive house construction as an economic development opportunity. It is this, I think specifically, there's opportunity for modular home or modular wall systems building in Akwesasne for export to Canada or export to the United States. I am certainly no tax lawyer, but it would be very interesting to see what the advantages are Akwesasne has straddling New York, United States, Quebec, Ontario, and Canada. You've got quite an interesting footprint, and so it would be interesting to see the benefits that may bring to manufacturing in Akwesasne. So you've talked about opportunities to create jobs and support construction-related businesses. That geographic location is a benefit. When you talk to councils, either on the Canadian or the American side, what's the recognition about moving to zero emission building standards? Are folks yet aware of that?
I feel like the community is so concerned about just getting people into homes,
Yeah.
and addressing some what they feel is more important issues with emergency repairs, that they kind of forget that what they're addressing is the symptoms and not the actual problem. And by getting us out of the energy poverty, like you mentioned, by building better homes, that's going to give you the solid foundation to build better everything and have that sure footing and security to continue to grow and continue to change and evolve. And that's really what's needed as the foundation. And I mean, everybody needs to live somewhere and everybody needs a house. So if we can get people into quality homes and energy efficient homes like Passive House, then definitely that's going to be a huge step forward and changing things and reversing that economic depression that we're experiencing now, and actually become an economic driver for the entire area.
Right. So as Passive House is adopted in all the jurisdictions around Akwesasne, there's employment opportunities and economic development opportunities, and obviously that's a good thing. Any final thoughts before we move into some Q&As, Jeremiah?
I guess just to help get this kind of awareness and education into the communities. Maybe it's to develop that partnership, because I even saw it when I traveled to Akwesasne. I mean, if you're not from the community, there's definitely a big trust factor that has to be built, and a relationship that has to be built. You can't just walk into a First Nations community and expect to be welcomed. People are quite skeptical. With the long history of Canada and U.S., with good reason too. So
I was just going to say, with very good reason, folks should be skeptical. I mean, I've always found in the work I've done in the northern Indigenous communities, folks are very welcoming, but they're also very skeptical, as they should be. So
and we're seeing it with the oil industry and the pipelines. They hire a couple of First Nations people, they bring them along to the meetings and say, yeah, look, we hire First Nations, and they kind of use it as a front, as a token, and that our communities quickly see through that and quickly dismiss that. So it's really going to take a little bit of time and effort to build that trust and start from there and start from that point. And then it can just grow exponentially from there. Once they see that you're actually trying to help and not just trying to sell something or introduce something new or whatever. So
right. Well, and as you said at the beginning, and then we'll get into a few questions, what you've said at the very beginning was about self-determination, and it's about leaving something behind. So not showing up in a community to sell something and then leave, but actually what capacity can be built in the communities, in the First Nation communities that you leave behind, whether it be a government program or a manufacturer who wants to partner to build in a community. That capacity development is something that First Nation people are looking for.
That's right. And every major city where trainings are typically held in person before COVID, of course, but at Ottawa or Toronto or wherever, there's always a First Nations community nearby. And it would be much easier to have that training held in the First Nations community, rent a facility there where people would travel there, as opposed to holding it downtown somewhere and having First Nations individuals travel downtown to attend. So
yeah, at great expense oftentimes.
Exactly. So with the economic disparity and the difficulties and the challenges, hosting those trainings right in the community and then inviting others to come and attend would be definitely easier to travel in that direction.
Yeah. So we'll leave it there. That the key messages are: there's wonderful opportunity in Akwesasne and other First Nation Indigenous communities across the country for passive house construction. There's wonderful opportunities for economic development, and First Nations are looking for meaningful partnerships with companies and governments and programs. Sounds like an exciting future.
Very much so.
Very good. Deb, what questions do we have?
Yeah, so thanks, Chris. So I just invite people to continue to put questions in the chat. If you would prefer, put your hand up and we can unmute you and go ahead. Harvey had a couple of questions and he is open to speaking to them directly. So Harvey, if you want to unmute and direct your question, go ahead.
Well, Chris knows that I'm not shy, so I'll kick it off. How's that, Chris? Jeremiah, nice to meet you. I have a couple of questions, and I think Chris hit on it, self-determination, but also I guess would be self-sufficiency. So the first one would be energy efficiency would be something that's very important, but then also at the same time something sustainable like solar panels on houses. Is that something that you guys are giving some consideration to? Is my first question, and I'll lead into the second.
Definitely, we have the Akwesasne Housing Authority, who has done a couple of significant projects with solar panel arrays and photovoltaics, which they were awarded in New York State, one of the largest developments in partnership with New York State, to have a quite a large solar array where the infrastructure for electricity is kind of at its max with that generating. What they found through those programs was that this high-tech solution is quite expensive and not financially feasible without the government programs, which then brings in a new problem, which is you have this high-tech, we've trained our people to service these panels, but it's not really a cost-effective way to produce electricity or produce energy, and really reducing the demand in the first place is definitely lowest hanging fruit. And that's what I've been pushing, is saying, yes, let's still do solar panels, but instead of doing a large solar array that's going to power a couple of homes, let's build that same array and power a couple hundred homes by reducing that demand for energy. And they start to understand that perhaps the sexiness of solar panels and those kinds of developments, yeah, it's great publicity and everything, but maybe at a huge financial cost at this point in time. As the technology develops further, it's definitely going to be more attainable and more accessible, but I feel like we're not quite there yet. And it's great to train our people and give that education, but we need to not forget about the wastefulness of our buildings as well.
Yeah, it's a good comment right across the country, isn't it, Jeremiah, that our values aren't as sexy as talking about solar arrays, but if you build the house right or the building right, and you're not using as much energy, then you can easily get to net zero, or even create excess energy when you have a well insulated, well built home.
That's right, and one of the stresses that I push is the resiliency of the buildings as well. So we have trouble with infrastructure and power supply to begin with, which we're trying to build and fix and make more reliable. So having a passive house to begin with, you're basically everybody is in an emergency shelter at that point. And we don't have to do all this rushing around like Ice Storm 98, where the complete infrastructure was knocked down. And we don't have to worry about that as much, because if that happens again with the climate change and all those effects, that we can actually have every building that is passive is definitely an emergency shelter at the same time. And really, it doesn't cost anything.
Great. Harvey, you had a follow-up question.
Yeah, I did. You sort of hit on it anyway, and I really like the idea of you talking about the education factor. And I think that it would be something that if you can set something up that train people there, that you can then start building on your own. And the more training you have for passive house. I'm a certified tradesperson as well, Jeremiah. So I'm very passionate, as Chris will tell you, I'm very passionate about it. And I think that if you had that, to me, the self-determination and the sustainability and the self-sufficiency is the utmost that should be on your mind. And then once you can use that as your basis to sell it and move on, because then you'll be able to build your own community. Then you'll have be able to bring money into your community by joint venturing with people, whether penalization's coming. It's just a matter of time, and then you're able to export your workers into outside the community. So to me, I think the education and taking your youth and getting them ready to start building on this. And then I think as well, the last part is you really hit on it. We all know how bad the housing is on a lot of the reservations, and how horrible the government has not stepped up. And if we can get into, like you just said, more durable homes, durability, then we can really make a significant impact on our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And I wish you well with that. And I wish when I get to a point, Jeremiah, I will link in with you. And when we start doing something, I'm in Toronto. If you have anyone you could suggest that would want to come on and work on one of our buildings that we're going to be coming up soon to do, I would really like that as well.
Excellent. Yeah, we're in Cornwall. We're right on the Via Rail, so it's a very short and very cheap train ride to get down to Toronto. So definitely, thank you for that.
Yeah, that's you make a really a good point, Harvey. That you can take the tradesperson course, and it's a wonderful course. But there's nothing like swinging a hammer on a project, working closely with someone who's experienced to teach you how to do it. So that's really great, and it would be wonderful if we could get more people to reach out. I wanted to say as well that we really appreciate Jeremiah being on the board of Passive House Canada. Because he brings not only the perspective of First Nations, Akwesasne and First Nations, but he's also a great engineer, Passive House designer, consultant, and engineer, and brings that expertise to the table as well. So we're really pleased to have Jeremiah on our board. And although the introduction said he was a new board member, you're really not a new board member now. You're into your second term, so you're fast becoming a veteran.
I got my certification in October 2019, and I joined the board January 2020. So
there you are. So you're all in, exactly. We're not going to let you go anywhere anytime too fast. So thanks for your dedication to Passive House, and thank you to the work that you're doing. Really, right across Canada, not just Akwesasne and communities around, but right across Canada. Deb, do we have any other questions? Any final questions before I do our little song and dance about training?
Yeah, there's just one more here.
Okay.
Jeremiah, are you aware of a list or a map of well-insulated passive homes on the reserve?
We have a couple of buildings now that are close to passive. When we did the course in 2019, those buildings were actually in design, and they tried to modify the design slightly to get closer to passive when it turned into construction. But it would be great to have a list like that. If there is one, I would like to see it as well. And I know BC has been quite progressive in picking up that end of it. And I know there's been some certified buildings in BC in some of the communities there. And we definitely, as you know, for everybody across Canada, we just need more of it. And
Yeah.
we need to keep pushing that front.
Yeah. And actually that addresses what we're doing at Passive House Canada right now is we are reconciling our Passive House database against the Passive House Institute database. And we're updating both of those databases, and it's interesting. It may be we may have the ability now to look at addresses so that we can better define passive house certified passive houses that are built on traditional lands or even on a reserve for research purposes. Sometimes what we find is that there are passive house buildings that are certified, but the owner doesn't want them publicized. So we have run into that a number of times. So I know there are more certified passive house buildings in Canada than our map at Passive House Canada would show. But we continue to push hard to have all buildings certified to one of the Passive House standards, because there's a standard that will fit everybody's need, we believe. And we look forward to supporting you as best we can, Jeremiah, other First Nations communities across the country. We know there's some development, some modular systems, some panel system plants being set up and running in Western Canada. It would be wonderful to see that sort of thing happening in Ontario, Central Canada as well. And we will, if anyone wants to give us a call, we will pass numbers along and put people together, because it's certainly something I think that will help First Nations. So
definitely. And there's a lot of information out there. You just have to look for it. I mean, every First Nations community is suffering from the same issues. And the First Nations community has been saying this for decades and decades, and saying it's been a problem, and nothing changes. And it's going to come down to Canadians who are also saying this needs to change, and also saying that something needs to happen. And that's what's going to cause the change. So we've been saying it all along. It's going to be Canadians stepping up and saying, this needs to change. We need to change this and push it.
And as Harvey did, it will depend on individual Canadians reaching out and saying, how can I help train? What can I do as a person to help? So we'll look for that. We'll look for more of that in future.
Definitely. There's a lot of programs for employment and subsidizing wages to get people experience on the job. There's a lot of those programs that exist. It's just placing them in the right industries and getting there. And what I've told our training board directly is that they're so focused on training people to be employees, and they forget about training people to be employers and be entrepreneurs. And that's really going to explode. And having that foundation where the mentality is like, get some training, get a job, you get a pension, that stuff doesn't exist anymore. And it's really, you're kind of left to your own, and finding that fit somewhere, and more employers, more entrepreneurs and employees. We need everything. And there's a lot of talent and knowledge and experience, and a lot of potential.
Absolutely. So we're going to celebrate the potential because we see it. We're going to highlight the potential because we see it. And we'll keep working with you and other First Nations across the country to bring Passive House to those communities, and to help facilitate Passive House building, Passive House economic development in those areas. So I'll say it again. Thank you very much for sitting on the board. Jeremiah, thank you very much for being on today's show. We will be in touch in the days and weeks ahead. So thank you very much. I'm going to do a quick little dog and pony show, because the focus, as Jeremiah has talked about a number of times, has been about education. And I want to just tell folks on the call a little bit about the educational opportunities that Passive House offers. You know, we truly believe that quality education is making the difference in bringing Passive House to Canadian communities. Jeremiah talked about the the Passive House Trade Certification. We have the pathway to Passive House Trade Certification starting soon. It's a 3-part course. It begins June the 2nd online, so it's easy to get hold of. The next is we have the Pathway to Designer Consultant Certification. This is really important for architects and engineers and building scientists and even people in general contracting to really understand Passive House. That program, that next program, these programs run throughout the year, but the next one starts June the 7th. Next slide. We have the, this is really interesting. One of our, an early Passive House person in Canada, Monty Paulson, a number of you probably know him, has created the pattern language for Passive House. It's a master class. And anyone who knows a little bit about Passive House but wants to learn more, this is a great course. Begins July the 7th. And the next, there we are. Don't miss our next building conversations. I'll be talking with Casey Gray. Casey's the founder of the Conscientious Builder. He's an Ottawa-based builder who really has been focusing on building to the highest level of performance possible. So we'll welcome Casey to our next event. And I know that Casey will be taking our trades course. So I'm going to be interested in talking to someone who's an experienced tradesperson about the Passive House Canada tradesperson course. So there we are, folks. Thank you very much for being on today's webinar. We look forward to seeing you June the 23rd when Casey Gray will be my guest. If you want, in the meantime, any information about Passive House Canada, feel free. The next slide has our information. PassiveHouseCanada.com. Email us, info@PassiveHouseCanada.com. There's our general phone number. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram. We're on YouTube. And in fact, this show will be rebroadcast on our YouTube channel. And we look forward to seeing you there. So thanks again, Jeremiah. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. I hope to see you all June 23rd. And in the meantime, as Canada begins to emerge from the from the pandemic cocoon, stay safe. And we all look forward to a much different summer this year. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week.